As those of you who know me, typically I like to begin the homily with a bit of a chuckle, a little joke to get your attention. When I was the assistant to the dean of the cathedral in Raleigh, when I was a young priest, he used to encourage all the clergy to start off with a joke. He used to say, if it softens them up for the big kill. I don't have anything to soften you up with today. Unfortunately, in today's lectionary, there's really not leitmotif. There's really no pathway for a chuckle or a joke. Even as we close the liturgical year, we stand at the very edge of the end of one liturgical year. I know the secular year will look to January for the new year, but for the church, it begins next Sunday, and today, the Feast of Christ the King, is the climax of the church year. We start with Advent and Lent and Easter and Pentecost and the green season as ordinary time, or as we in the old days call it Trinity Tide, to culminate in this one proclamation that Jesus Christ is supreme over heaven and earth, and he claims each of us as his subjects. And you can't escape that in the lessons today. And as such, there's really no chuckle to be had, because it's all rather serious. We're not, first of all, comfortable with the idea of king and subjects. And Miss Kathleen Snow is here from the Mothers Union, the international president. We welcome her. And she's a member of the Commonwealth as a citizen of Canada, so she has some familiarity with the idea of king and subject, but it's not as grand as it always sounds, is it, Kathleen? No. And so less so here, as we know in our own country, all these protests about no kings, and I'm not going to get into a commentary on that. But the point is that we live in a world at this juncture that shuns monarchs, that really struggles with the idea of monarchy. Because the reality is that we live in a society in the West, in particular, that values its autonomy above all else. And it's awkward and odd when we come face to face with kingship. When I was a newly consecrated bishop, was I consecrated when this happened in Ghana, or was it your ordination? In either case, I was in the Diocese of Dunkwa in Ghana, Bishop Edmund, who some of you will remember with fondness. And it was decided that I should be made a chief in the king's court in the tribe of Dunkwa. This is not a joke. As a matter of fact, there is live video, and it was at St. Anthony's Cathedral in Dunkwa, and I was vested in all the regalia of kingship, in addition to the vestments I already had on. I about had heat stroke. And as it was happening, I was both humbled and awed by it, but in the same vein, it was very uncomfortable because this was so far afield from how I understood living life. I don't live in a kingdom. I don't give honor to a king. I mean, we respect those who are in elected office, certainly. And I felt my autonomy being somewhat infringed upon. And so I use that as an illustration to say we're really at a level of disease about this notion of royalty and monarchy. Now, that doesn't mean we're not fascinated by things like the Holy Family. Oh, I wish we were fascinated by the Holy Family. That would be fantastic if we were fascinated by the Holy Family. But the royal family, we like the gossip and all that goes on with it. But nobody wants to be under the subject of a monarch. We like self-rule. We like self-determination. It's built into the Western DNA. I remember when my nephew was 2, I've told this story before, he's now 28, but he was 2 or 3, and I was asked to mind him a bit in the backyard of my brother's house, and he was on the swings, and he was really going way high, and of course, I really wasn't comfortable with that. Thomas hadn't come onto the scene yet, so I wasn't used to this sort of behavior amongst kids, and I stopped the swing, and I said, Justin, you're really going too high. He said, you're not the boss of me. At 3. Actually, what he said it was, you may look like my father, but you're not my father. You're not the boss of me. For those of you who don't know, I'm an identical twin, so that was quite something out of the mouth of a 3-year-old. We want to govern ourselves, but the irony is we are failingly spectacular at governing ourselves. We are really amazingly poor at it. If you doubt that, turn to the lesson from Jeremiah. Jeremiah prophesies as much when he announces that we humans are poor shepherds of our own souls, he writes. And the evidence, he says, is everywhere. Human beings being human. No less is true in our own day and age. Anxiety, burnout, moral drift, the endless chase for more that never satisfies. That's what governs a lot of people's day, a lot of people's energy. Maybe even some of us. It's a failure to govern yourself when that becomes the driving force of who you are. Christ the King, Christ who is the King, turns all this upside down, flips it over. The interesting thing is that Christ doesn't demand that we surrender our freedom. Rather, he offers us freedom. He seeks to liberate us from the things that oppress us. He seeks to liberate us from the very autonomy that actually sends us astray. And yet, we're too stubborn or too foolish or too full of ourselves to hear him. And at the end, what do we have? We have guilt, fear, decay. Isn't that what's going on in the story at the end of the gospel? The thief realizes where he's gone wrong. This is it. It's the end of the line. His life was in decay. He knows it. The end is near. He fears it. The guilt is omnipresent. Christ senses it. And what does the king do? He doesn't judge. He doesn't condemn. He consoles and welcomes him. Why wouldn't you want to be subject to a king like that? That's a question for today. Why wouldn't we want to be subject to a king like that? So wait a second, Buster. I'm here. You're singing to the choir. You know, I have the occasion to travel to England a good bit because of the role I play, and I get to be around a lot of different things. Even when I was at Oxford, a lot of kind of royal subterfuge goes on. You can be a spectator in all that is kingly and not be a participant. Some of us might well be spectators today, but not participants. And Jeremiah is also mindful of that. He says, one who serves only himself will ruin himself. Instead, Christ offers a ministry of service that goes beyond ourselves. And if that point doesn't ring home for us to maybe think about this differently, St. Paul makes an ontological argument. He makes it very clear. All things were created through him and for him. Not some things, not a few things, not whatever you think works. All things were created through him and for him. We used to say in the old liturgy, all things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee. The problem with that in the Anglican universe is it becomes rote. We just kind of say it. It's like, the Lord be with you, also with you. I mean, even here, we have to say the Lord be with you to get your attention. We're not going to pray, but we know you won't stop eating, so we have to get your attention that way. All things come of thee, O Lord, and of thy own have we given thee. Why? Because he's the firstborn of all creation, the axis around which the universe turns. This is what Paul's saying. It's a rather ontological and complicated position. He says to be under his rule, to be under Christ's rule, means that our very being aligns with Christ, and that colors our reality. does the Christian gospel really color our reality? Does the vision of Jesus as King color our reality? In another lectionary year, not this year, but next year, the gospel for this day would be the 25th chapter of Matthew's gospel, beginning at the 31st verse. You know it well. It's on our sign. Whatsoever you do to the least of these, you've done unto me. Remember what the context that story takes place in. The king shall call them together, and he shall separate the goats and the sheep. The king shall gather them together. And he shall decide how the subjects shall go into eternity. And of course, he makes it abundantly clear that the vision for the kingdom is for the least and the lost. We believe in the West, in our amelioration of the gospel, that as long as we're nice people, we're Christian people. I love Hallmark movies. They're fantastic. Drives my wife crazy. I watch them all the time. It puts me in the Christmas spirit. It's nostalgic. It's very nice. But make no mistake, it has nothing to do with the witness of the gospel. Nothing. I love these people who try to extrapolate all this meaning in the Hallmark movies. They're not there. It's a nice story about nice people who do nice things. The dilemma is it has nothing to do with Christianity. Jesus doesn't say, whenever you've been nice to another, you've been nice to me. So when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. This kingdom vision for kingship that we abide by here is not just because we're trying to be nice people. We're trying like heck to be kingdom people. Which is why on the second and fourth Sunday, we bring in the food for the least and the lost, those who are suffering food insecurity, those who have nowhere to go. This weekend alone, 6,000 meals given away for Thanksgiving at United Way here in Tampa Bay. One of the highest levels of food insecurity in the United States, because it goes hand in hand with the fact that we're the third most unchurched area in the United States. No surprise. This notion that the nicety is confused with kingship and kingdom living is a mistake. And yet, here on Church Row, there are churches up and down confusing the two, who I'll not name. The invitation today for Christ to be our King is to gain new purpose. The invitation today is to have a framework for how to live. And the invitation, I dare say, is also to be rescued. Rescued from ourselves, rescued from the penalty of a broken world. Dismas, the good thief, he chose to trust the king, who he did not know, over his own self-determination and his own self-justification. And we spend so much of our lives justifying what we do, rationalizing it, making it square with reality. So, well, like, what are you talking about? Well, let's see. It's Thanksgiving week this week. It was a highlight. Probably one of the most tense times of the year. Why? Because I'm going to have to deal with my family. Oh, no. Uncle Louie is this. Aunt Jane is that. I don't talk to this one. I don't talk to that one. And then the rationalizations begin as to why we don't. Is that really the kingship of Christ? We're all subjects. We all pale before him. Yeah, I know so-and-so did X to you and Mary Jane did Y to you. So did you. So did I. We had this notion, well, their sin's worse than my sin. Where's that in the text? Paul says, be accountable for yourself. All I'm trying to say in rather elaborate long term is to live under his reign means to reject the world's definitions. The definitions of power, the definitions of love, the definitions of self-acceptance, the definition of being successful. Because the reality is that to be under the kingship of Christ means to be countercultural. It means to go against the trend, go against the vein. It means to seek justice. It means to love mercy. It means to walk humbly with God. We know that well from Micah 6:8, but it's a great, great slogan. It needs to become an incarnate reality. The second thing about kingship is that it's designed to heal division. Christ is the only one that is the great unifier. I don't care what politician and what party you're a member of. And even if that's your most sublime ideal, they'll never get close. Only Christ has that capacity. For Christ is a healer. Christ is an agent of reconciliation by his very being. It's not something you have to put on a platform. That notion of healing is so important in a broken and hurting world. That's why we're commissioning New Stevens ministers today, and why that ministry is so important. Stepping into fractured lives in a fractured world. And then lastly, the kingship of Christ calls us to humility. As the great Ted Hesburgh, the president of Notre Dame University, once said upon his retirement, one of the two things after 40 plus years at Notre Dame you can say about your tenure. So there's two things. One, there is a God, and two, I'm not he. We have to understand that we're not the God that people think they are. If we truly profess Jesus Christ as Lord and King today, we must crown him today. Not with gold or pomp, although we've got enough of it decked out here, but with our lives, with our work, with our love, and with our lips. We need to crown him with the sacrifice that gives up comforts for the sake of justice. We need to crown him with worship, where every song and prayer and silence really does bespeak his lordship. And we need to crown him with action. We must be the hands that feed, the voices that speak, the hearts that forgive. My dear friends in Christ, until every knee bows and every tongue confesses, which is in the fullness of time, my prayer for you and for me today is that we are the living, breathing proof that Christ's reign is not a distant doctrine, but a present reality that the world is waiting for. Amen.